Good evening, everyone. Salam, shalom, peace be upon you all. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar, Off Limits: How Does My Faith Inspire My Politics? We are excited to have an engaging conversation about how faith can make us better citizens, especially by sharing our personal stories. My name is Kinan Tawil, and I have the honor of serving as the program coordinator for Muslim student life at Loyola Marymount University. I will be co-moderating this webinar alongside Dr. Reinhard Kraus, the Executive Director of the Academy for Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies. We are honored to be joined by our amazing panelists this evening: Rabbi Zachary Zeisman, the campus rabbi and director of Jewish student life at Loyola Marymount University; Father Alexei Smith, ecumenical and interreligious officer of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles; and Salam El-Mariati, president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC. It's always a pleasure to be in the company of friends and colleagues who really are such blessings for our interfaith community here in Southern California. And before we begin, I would also like to thank our co-sponsors this evening, the Academy for Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies, and IslamiCity for this exciting collaboration. And finally, I would like to thank the Interfaith Youth Corps for making this webinar possible through their Interfaith Starter Grant. Dr. Kraus, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Kinan. I would like to also welcome you, all of those of you who are participating, and extend a special thank you also to Kinan, who started this webinar, initiated, as he mentioned, by a grant from Interfaith Youth Corps. And it has been wonderful to collaborate in the planning of this webinar. To say that we live in contentious times is clearly an understatement. Our country is deeply divided. We have been through an election that has divided our country like perhaps never before. And in the public square, there is a lot of arguing, shouting, statements, and oftentimes we speak at each other in a way that confronts our fixed position with somebody else's fixed position. The same is true of religion. We have arrived at conclusions and convictions and present them to other people in a way that doesn't get to the heart of the matter very frequently. And then it is very easy to label one another as socialists, communists, liberals, conservatives, bigots, whatever you have in the political sphere. And in the religious sphere, you have labels like also liberals, fundamentalists, and people who are close-minded. This is not a very helpful approach in our country, as we all agree needs healing, both in the religious and the political sphere. And so instead of labeling one another and weaponizing our respective positions, we want to take a very different approach. And we feel that religion and politics are not off limits, but we want to talk about those two topics because they're crucial for the healing of this country and also provide deep resources to bring that healing about. And we want to go about this conversation tonight by each of our very eminent panelists to share something about their religious grounding and their journey that led them to the place in the public sphere that they hold. They were probably not born with the idea that they would end up in the place where they find themselves right now. And as I said, it gets very interesting when we hear a person's spiritual journey, because it allows us to step in another person's shoes. And even if we disagree at the end, to say, yes, this makes some sense. This is how the person was led along the way. So I would invite our panelists to speak from a personal place. Each of you is deeply grounded in your religious traditions, but what led you to the place, in the prominent place in the public sphere that you hold? Who were your mentors? Who were your people that influenced you, your role models? And so let's start with Rabbi Zach. You are a Jewish rabbi at a Roman Catholic university. How did that happen?
Well, I first of all, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Kraus, to Keenan, to all of my friends and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you. I wish we were together in person, but another time for that. I'm wishing health and safety to not only all of my friends and colleagues, but everyone watching. So my understanding was that we only had an hour, so that would be a little bit too long to go into. But you know, I always, when I talk to students or when I talk to colleagues, I always say that, you know, we never read the Bible in my home. Growing up in my home, I never was steeped in religion. In fact, I was much more raised by pop culture than I was with text. And in many ways, I was raised by a combination of hippies, liberals, and progressives, who were my parents, who were not politically active at all, nor were they religiously active at all. But they were growing up in a time in Los Angeles where my family is from, that you know, they were very much, I think they were more involved in music and pop culture than anything else. But their parents, my grandparents, were, may they rest in peace, survivors of the Holocaust. And so the echoes of the Holocaust certainly permeated the household that I grew up in. And I couldn't identify that or articulate that in the moment. And it's only in hindsight, is only as I'm getting older as an adult that I'm looking back, then I say, really the echoes of the Holocaust are the beginnings of my political and religious life. But again, of course, I didn't know any of that until recently, really. So, you know, with this context, I would say certainly my grandparents, my bubby, my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our family, certainly in this context would be my role model. And she would be very proud, I think, certainly that I became a rabbi, and that I was a rabbi doing this with others, you know, at a Jesuit school, I think would make her very proud.
Why so?
You know, I said that, or I spoke that I wasn't really raised in politics or religion. And, you know, what I remember being raised in, and my bubby was very much a part of this, my grandmother was very much a part of this. I feel like I was raised or steeped in Martin Luther King Jr. philosophy or religion. And by that, I mean that when it comes to religion or my political journey, Bubby would always say, you know, treat everyone equal, treat everyone with respect, treat people by the content of their character, not necessarily by the color of their skin. Of course, now we know in hindsight that maybe we could have done that a little bit differently, but I remember being sort of, you know, be nice. My bubby would always tell me, be a mensch. It was really important for her to treat everyone kindly. And I think mostly because she wasn't most of her life. It's not only that she wasn't treated nicely, but she was, you know, her family was murdered and on and on. And so I think that she would get a kick out of, you know, Judaism was the most important, right? So, and we can unpack this also. She would always say, I don't care who you fall in love with or marry. It could be anyone. We want them to be nice and treat you well. And then on the side or under her breath, she would say, but I want them to be Jewish. So I think she would be proud that I was a rabbi and you know, taking that forward from what was lost in her childhood. But then the fact that I was a rabbi at a Jesuit university I think she would have gotten a kick out of, because they don't necessarily go together, but it's in the spirit, as I understand, of being nice and being a mensch.
Thank you. Father Alexei, you are responsible for faith relations, interfaith relations in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles, which is the largest Catholic diocese in the country, home to 5 million Catholic Christians. You are a Greek Orthodox priest. That sounds intriguing. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, actually, I'm going to correct you a little bit there, Doctor.
Okay, that's good.
I am Catholic, yes. I'm not Greek Orthodox, but I am Greek Catholic.
Did I say Greek Orthodox? No, Greek Catholic.
Automatically, it seems the two words Greek and Orthodox seem to be connected organically, but we have to separate those a little bit.
Yes.
The Catholic Church is more than the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is actually a communion of 23 different churches, all united with Rome. Greek Catholics are one of those churches. I was actually raised as a Roman Catholic here in Los Angeles. I'm the product of Roman Catholic schools here. That's where I really had my first political interaction, if you will, social justice action. I adopted Eastern Christianity, Greek Catholicism, if you will, later in life. And I was attracted mainly by the mysticism and the splendid liturgy type. Those two aspects of the faith really resonated with me. Also, the idea of not trying to define everything about God, but to really to experience God. I think that my first, in fact, I know that I said that I was raised in the Roman Catholic school. I was raised by my parents rather strictly as a Catholic. We went to, my brother and I both went to elementary and secondary schools that were run by the Catholic Church. We were taught a lot about, in those days, this is pre-Vatican II now, pre-Second Vatican Council. So we were pretty exclusive. You know, we were the sole possessors of the truth, all this other stuff, which fortunately, with the Second Vatican Council, we've changed our mentality. We're open, have this openness to other faiths. I've often said, Reinhardt, that those nuns who taught me in elementary school must be rolling around in their tombs now when they see the type of work that I'm doing with other religions, because we were absolutely strictly forbidden from even thinking of doing such a thing, let alone actually doing it. And wow. in the realm of social justice as well, I remember the first real incident in which I found myself involved was in elementary school, where my best friend happened to be an African-American kid, young guy. And I didn't think anything of it. I invited him to come to my house one day, and we were in a play or whatever. And the neighbor lady across the street was absolutely livid that I would be bringing an African-American into our neighborhood. And she called my mother. I remember hearing my mother on the phone trying to calm this lady down. You know, it was the beginning of the whole civil rights movement and everything else in those days. And it was a indication, I think, of where my political leanings would be formed.
But can I ask you what made that so normal, that you took an African-American friend home? Did that have anything to do with your spiritual journey? I don't know what age you were. What made it so normal, and so what caused the contrast to your neighbor?
What made it normal for me was that the Catholic Church was teaching us in school about the essential dignity of the human person, of every human person. I never even considered Maurice to be Black. I just considered him to be my buddy.
Yes.
You know, it never occurred to me that others would think differently. But this lady across the street thought very differently and expressed herself very loudly.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you for that wonderful glimpse of early on that spark of saying, I'm not afraid to be different.
Yes, exactly.
If that's what my conviction tells me to do. Salam, you lead the largest Muslim public relations organization in the United States. You yourself are of Syrian background. I'm not sure whether you imagined yourself doing what you're doing and have been doing for quite some time so successfully. How did it start?
Well, actually, I'm of Iraqi background, and it
You're of
started.
Iraqi background. Oh,
Oops. Oops.
excuse me, forgive me.
It's okay, they're neighbors. It's close enough.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
I confused you with Kenan.
Yes, who's also of European descent. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
it's interesting because in 1963, my family fled persecution from Iraq. And in many ways, I connect back to that as Rabbi Zachary was talking about his family dealing with the Holocaust. I think for many Muslims, we have dealt with genocide for decades, if not centuries. And you look at what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, the Rohingya in Burma, the Kashmiris, the Indian Muslims now suffering atrocities because of religious nationalism there, the Palestinians, the longest running occupation in the world today, the Syrians and the Iraqis, both suffering from tyranny, despots from within the country, but still suffering. Yemen, Bosnia, Chechnya, and the list goes on. And I feel that that the Muslim history is connected to that legacy of suffering. And even among African American Muslims, let's say these are the immigrant Muslims who come from those lands, and we all have a story of persecution. We all have a story of dealing with genocide. African American Muslims obviously have a story of dealing with slavery, the worst atrocity in this country, the original sin of America. So we're all coming from a background of dealing with suffering. And I believe that the journey for all of us is to find our way towards justice. It's that quest, that thirst for justice. And we believe that the best path towards justice is the path of God. And that's what brings us to religion. Religion is not to be presented per se, but it's to be served. And by serving religion and connecting to our religious values, this is what makes us human and makes us understand why it is a struggle that we have to embrace, not just tolerate. And therefore, the struggle itself is giving us energy, giving us reward, not just achieving an accolade here or there. So I believe that religion has given us that proper framework for dealing with the lives that we have experienced and with the lives of people whom we do not know, who have also suffered. And that's why our religious groups, our religious work together is so important today.
And I would say this is what MPAC has always stood for, not just to lobby for the Muslim community, but to seek justice for all in this country. And you do amazing work in that regard.
Yes, and I believe the man who we honor the most in terms of giving us that message is Dr. Maher Hathout, God rest his soul, his brother, Dr. Hassan Hathout, their colleague, Dr. Fethi Osman, a great scholar. And they all believed that Islam had a better opportunity in America in terms of manifesting these values of mercy, compassion, and justice. In America would give us that better opportunity than anywhere in Muslim majority countries, unfortunately. But we have a purpose. We have that purpose in America to see Islam in the West, not Islam versus the West, but to be a part of a Western society where Muslims are integrated and seen for who they are, contributing, enriching our pluralism.
Thank you. Kenan, do you want to chime in, react in any way to the wonderful comments we've heard?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a few comments. A lot of this also harkens back to my own kind of childhood and upbringing, things that I heard, because I had grandparents who were refugees who survived World War II on my mother's side. And I have the immigrant story also from both sides of my parents. So it's all very
Oops.
day to day is we often forget that history, or we're not keeping it in our memory as much as we used to, let's say. You see statistics out there about how many Americans now don't even know much about the Holocaust anymore, don't know what Auschwitz is. Things like this, when we start to forget our history, that concerns me. Does anyone have any advice about how to keep this history alive so that we can keep our, kind of our eyes set on pursuing justice for everyone?
Thank you. Do you want to comment on what you've heard from each other before we move on to the next segment?
I mean, for Muslims, we have maybe not answering Kenan's question directly, but we have an issue with history, the way it's been written here in the West. As you start with ancient Greek civilization and Roman, to something called the Dark Ages, and then the Renaissance and modern Western civilization.
Yeah.
Those Dark Ages were basically the peak of Islamic civilization.
Yeah.
And so it is the omission of Islam in world history that dehumanizes the Muslim. Yeah. And that blotch has really given us a lack of history and a lack of legacy, and created in many ways an identity crisis for the Muslim. Like, who are we? What are we about? If we were to complete our history by making it more comprehensive, making it more accurate, not in a way of proselytizing or saying that this religion is better than another religion, but just to show contributions of all religions, for that matter, into world civilization. I think the way we look at history would be connecting us to our own humanity, to each other's humanity. And therefore, we appreciate the gravity more of the Holocaust. It's not just a historical event that is fading with time, but it is something that is real. And as many Jewish organizations are doing today, working to make sure that it is prevented from happening to any other people. And we can all say never again. So I believe that kind of approach to history is needed by our religious groups.
And it's quite clear that people of all religions, despite and sometimes in the midst of hostilities, have learned from one another and adopted teachings from one another. For example, that the Muslims, as you say, in Spain, during the time of Muslim Spain, transmitted the Greek authors that were lost to the West.
Yes.
Without that, there wouldn't be a so-called Western civilization. So I think it's a very important point you're making.
I may be jumping the gun, Reinhard, but just to pick up on Salam's wonderful point, I was listening to my teacher, Stephen Windmuller, earlier today, who's a wonderful historian of American Jewry, and I think this particular point in history lends itself potentially to this idea of returning to civics, of a reimagining and even reframing of an American history that for so long has not telling a full picture of everyone who's a part of the American story, right? I think of Amir Hussein's wonderful book about Muslims in America. And as a 40-year-old man, I'm reading his book, and for the first time understanding that Muslims are in fact from the very, very beginning. And so I think, just a reimagining, reframing of not only civic engagement, but how we tell our story in a way to almost come up with a new American story, a new American dream that's more inclusive and more has a bigger umbrella.
I would just add that Rabbi, I don't know that we need a new American dream. I think we have to live that American dream as it was originally conceived. And I think that idea of refashioning history, I think we have to look at history as it truly is and was, rather. I mean, I agree with you. Without Amir Hussein's book on the history of Muslims in the United States, I wouldn't know half of those things. Same thing I think about the Jewish population here and all of our populations here. If we would really look at the contributions they made to American society, if those were included in the history and civic lessons that are being taught in schools today, I think we have a very different world here.
And tacking on to that, and as also as a segue to our next theme, the framers of the Constitution established a separation of church and religion, as it is sometimes called. And we talk about civil rights as if civil rights dropped out of the sky, out of nowhere, as if civil rights is something independent of religious convictions and motivations and inspiration that people had. And it was diverse at the beginning of this republic, and it is still and becoming more diverse today. So I want to pose the question, in your religious tradition, what is it that you think is a special contribution to the American society that is still to be fashioned and to be established in working together? Salam, you mentioned the passion for justice. How is that rooted in the Muslim tradition, particularly?
Well, the Quran tells us that God has bestowed human dignity on the children of Adam. And so we believe that when the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, started his mission, it was a mission for human dignity. And actually, this draws striking parallels with the mission of Jesus, yes, who was bringing human dignity back to religion, of Moses, who was bringing human dignity in liberating his people from the shackles and the chains of slavery of the Pharaoh. And so it is a story of human dignity that we see in each chapter of religion. And it is a chapter that we still have to write for the 21st century. Where is human dignity going in this century, and how are religious groups working towards that? And I believe that that is something that is still missing in America, and that the labeling and the partisanship and the infighting is over material issues and political issues and pride and nationalism and all these other things that are interfering with our mission. But it just means that the work for human dignity is that much more important today than ever before.
Would you say that from an Islamic perspective, it's not national security but human security that counts?
Oh, as if you read from MPAC's website.
Which of course he did not.
We spend as a country over $1 trillion for national security. If you count the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Council, the National Counterterrorism Center, and so on and so forth. And yet you ask any American, do you feel secure? Most Americans would say, no, I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure. And that's because we have forgotten that real security is, again, what I believe our revelations have given us from the Torah and the Gospel and the Quran, is that God had promised us prosperity and human security if we follow his path, if we work for what is right and attain to faith in God and God alone. And that human security is the feeling that I am safe because, number one, I am protected by each and every one of you. Together, we create human security. Together, we work for food security, health security. This is the greatest threat to America today. This pandemic that has exposed the insufficiencies and health insecurity for our people, employment security, racial equality. Those are the real means of gaining security. And again, I believe religious groups have a unique role in pursuing human security as a means of achieving real national security.
Thank you. Father Alexei, what is the special Christian contribution? Because it seems we are all so much on one page, but is there something specific that Christians are called to contribute to the public sphere? And as Salam said, the realization of human dignity.
Well, I wouldn't want to suppose that I could speak for all Christians. I can speak for Catholic Christians, but I wouldn't want to say I can speak for all Christians. I think and Salam alluded to that, the message of Christ is the respect for the individual and their dignity, and the love for each and every one of God's creatures and his creations. From a Catholic point of view, again, as I said earlier, human dignity and respect for the human dignity is the foundation of all of our social teaching. The human person is not only has dignity, but they are social, and therefore the church works and advocates social settings for environments of people, family life, the dignity of work, for example, a job. The economy is not supposed to be serving, the people are not supposed to be serving the economy is supposed to be serving the people. The dignity of work, the ability to organize and such. Also the idea of care for the environment, which we sadly had been neglecting really until this push now with Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. We show our care and stewardship of creation. When we do that, we are helping the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable in our society. So all these come back to Jesus' teaching of living the two great commandments, love of God and love of neighbor as oneself.
So one could say that if Christians were really following the teachings of Jesus, our society would look quite different.
Oh, I could guarantee that. I could guarantee that.
Yeah. So, Rabbi Zach.
Just one other quick statement.
Yeah.
Last Sunday in a sermon here, I quoted St. John Chrysostom, who basically said at one point, if there were but 10 people out there who followed the teachings of Jesus, we would enkindle such a flame that we would enlighten this whole metropolis here. If only 10 people truly live the teachings of Jesus, think of the light of Christ and his love and his respect and acceptance of others that we would be manifesting here in Los Angeles.
Wow. Rabbi Zach, as the oldest tradition from which both Christianity and Islam have learned about the oneness of God, the creator of all that is, what are some of the teachings that inspire the Jewish community, and what can the Jewish community contribute to the public discourse that is specific to your community?
Yeah, as I was listening to my friend Salam, I was getting nervous that my notes maybe got lost in the shuffle. And hearing Father Alexei talking about, human dignity. The first thought that came to mind was a teaching by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who says that we affirm the separation of religion and the state, but we reject the separation of religion from the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So as I mentioned, I was way political before I ever became religious in my life, and once I started to slowly, and it was a process for me, become religious. My religion only reinforced my political beliefs. It became like a catch, or Ouroboros said it fed the beast. So the way that I understand Judaism is that there's a really big interest in this sort of economic and cosmic justice, this interest in bringing balance and justice to the world. So when I started to understand laws like an eye for an eye, you know, it used to be I thought that I poke out your eye, you get to poke out my eye. But as I fully got to understand, no, if I poke out your eye, I'm now responsible for compensating you for the damage I caused. And so, you know, again, it's this bringing back of balance, interested in fairness. And I think Father Alexei really said it. I mean, you don't have to look any further. If you wanted to distill Judaism down to 2 rules, you don't have to look any further, in my opinion, than ve'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Right? This amazing concept of to think about when that sentence was written and what the social sort of strata of life was, and to say, no, you need to love everyone as you would love yourself is pretty mind-boggling. And equally as wonderful is the idea that we're all created B'Tselem Elohim, that we're all created in the image of God. And it doesn't say that Moses was created in the image of God and only Abraham. And it says that everyone, human beings, are created in the image of God. And so again, that only reinforced what I heard Bubby say, which was treat everyone nicely, be a mensch, you know, make sure you're fair and equal. And so it was really easy for me to make that leap. I'll end with one of my other favorite quotes by Elie Wiesel, who says that the role of Judaism was never to make the world more Jewish, but to make it more human. And that's, I think, I heard that reflected in my friends, Father Alexei and Salam as well. So,
thank you. Kenan, you want to add?
Sure. One thing came to mind about, you know, the public discourse and sort of the concept of civic engagement as a whole as it relates to our faith traditions. The verse in the Quran that says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, and their affairs are a mutual consultation between each other. I think for our modern day, we can take that to mean, you know, let's have a democratic process where everyone's vote and voice is heard. So I think in the pursuit of justice, there's definitely a responsibility for us to defend the democratic process, to defend everyone's right to vote, and to make sure that they have the right to vote and they have equal access to the vote. So I think that that's really important to focus on today, you know, where we see disenfranchisement in different parts of the country, unfortunately. I think as part of our, you know, obligation to also defend the human dignity of our fellow citizens. If they are truly, they have dignity and we're equal citizens before the law, then we need to have the equal access to the vote. So I think that that's one way that we can kind of put our faith into action today.
I think that's also a wonderful segue to our final third of the conversation. Namely, it seems that there is much agreement among the 3 religions, at least, who are represented here. And I think the consensus is broader than even the 3 Abrahamic religions in emphasizing justice, human dignity. And so the question is, why do these voices not ring louder in the public sphere? Or to put it in another way, what can we do to make those very constructive voices heard and count? What are the actions needed, especially after a rather divisive 4 years of President Trump and his administration? How can we as religious people be part of the rebuilding and moving into the future of this nation? And I don't know who would like to start, maybe Father Alexei.
Thank you for that. Well, I think that actually Pope Francis has given us a tool to use here. with his new encyclical called Fratelli Tutti, Brothers and Sisters All. I think we have to start treating one another as brothers and sisters, as God's fellow, as those created in God's image. And that's for everyone, absolutely everyone. Now, brothers and sisters don't always get along, but they're still bonded together by their common humanity. And we have to focus on that common humanity. And I think the more that we do that, the better chance we have as religious leaders to try to bring all these divisive elements in our country together once again.
So let me ask the question. You are also a Catholic priest and you are the shepherd of a congregation. To what extent are you specific in terms of political policy decisions or positions, knowing that you come from this place of deep religious convictions that affirm the human dignity for all? Or to put it in another way, are the political parties a hindrance or a help in that pursuit?
Both and. For many Catholics, I think that we are homeless when it comes to a political party, because no single party in this country totally represents the Catholic social teaching. They might advocate certain aspects of it, but they would denigrate other aspects of it. So our job as a pastor, my job as a pastor, is to help to form people's conscience, that they could then assess political candidates, for example, with a formed conscience as to how they either resonate with Catholic social teaching or they don't, and no one candidate's going to be totally one way or the other. And then you have to engage in, by forming a person's conscience, then helping a person to form their conscience, then you have to look at economia, the greater good. What would be the greater good here? What would be the greater good for all of humanity? Not just for yourself.
Thank you.
Dr. Krauss, I was going to suggest or say that I think we're going to need a bigger boat, to borrow one of my favorite quotes from.
Unpack that a little.
Well, first of all, I think this is wonderful. I think that these kind of conversations is part of the answer. I'm noticing, and part of the issue is that, well, I'm just going to say it. We need more voices, right? So there's no women on this call, on this panel. So I know I'm a cis white, gender person, and I think we're needing a bigger boat is we're going to have to extend the umbrella. I hear Father Greg Boyle talking about the margins of our society, whether it's LGBT or Black or whatever it is. So I think we're going to need a bigger boat. Particularly in the Jewish community, there is such a whole array of political interest and ideas, from far left to far right. And so we're going to have to acknowledge that, and we're going to have some really, really challenging conversations. And the trick is going to be inviting a diversity of viewpoints into that conversation. And that diversity of viewpoints, I think, is essential. And it's going to be on not only clergy members, but I think, professionals to do that publicly, to have that conversation publicly, and to do it in a way where you can learn to depolarize, and not focus necessarily on the hot button issues, but find the shared interest, the common ground, and create some new ground where many voices and voices that typically aren't at the table can be heard.
I would fully agree that we need a bigger boat, and it's unfortunate that we are all men on this call, and we are promising to not let that happen again. I think it happened for this first round, since we simply know each other as friends, and we also inquired and are planning to have more diversity in terms of gender, more in terms of ethnicity, more in terms of sexual orientation, by all means. And I think, as I said in the beginning, what I find particularly helpful is what we're doing in this conversation, not just stating what we believe, but where we're coming from. Because when we explain to each other where we are coming from, then it somehow makes it much more difficult to label one another with a label, but to say maybe this person is inspired by similar values than I am, but reaching different conclusions. Salam, where do we go from here in terms of our country, both professionally and what do you feel personally?
Well, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that Trump was not the problem. He was the symptom of a deeper problem. And these issues are not going to go away after January 20th. They may transform themselves to, or manifest themselves into different problems, whether it is the issue of white supremacist violence or the issues that impact our policies and what kind of courts we're going to have and what kind of Congress we're going to have in terms of dealing with those issues that, I mean, for us as religious people, we're all trained that society's strength and power is measured by how it can take care of the vulnerable, not by how it can appease the rich and powerful. And I think that is still our cause this day in achieving equity throughout our society. And therefore, we cannot be left or right. We, as the Quran says, you have been made to be a community of the middle way, to be that moderating force between these two extremes. And we should not go left and be used as a whip against the right. And we cannot go so far to the right that we forget the values of social justice and we only care about our religion at the expense of other people. We have to remember that God gave us freedom before he gave us religion. And he gave us religion as the institution to defend our freedom and to defend the rights of others. That is why we are involved in religion, because we believe it is the best framework for guaranteeing, as Kenan said earlier, our democratic nature, our quest for democracy, our quest for freedom, and to preserve it. And then the last thing I just wanted to emphasize then, at the end of the day, when we say we have to be the people of the middle way, that to me is the best opportunity for us to be that bridge and to be that healing mechanism between these two vying parties. And we cannot let the party become our God. And in many ways, when I look at political parties, it's like a cult. And I believe religion, again, has the medicine to prevent or mitigate this cult behavior, that just because one man, and it's usually a man, is put up on the pedestal, we all adore that man and we think that that man is our savior and he's going to take us to the mountaintop and so on and so forth, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever else, in the future. That is how they are treated. We have to move away from that. And again, look to how these parties must look to the people for consent, people for consultation, people for coming up with community-based solutions to our problems. And whether the person be Black or white, we have to deal with the injustices against all people, whether it's poor white communities throughout that blue belt, the blue wall, or African Americans who are continuously abused and are treated with violence, are met with violence by our own law enforcement. These are the issues that should be important for us, regardless of which side of the aisle people are talking from.
This very much echoes what Father Alexei was saying, that it's the formation of conscience
Yes.
that then leads individuals to responsible action. It
Yeah.
also means that being grounded in a religious tradition, of whatever it is, we believe that there is a transcendent God in whose eyes our temporary institutions and ways of doing and being community are always imperfect. And we must always criticize the imperfect in light of that transcendent reality. Otherwise, we fall into a cult. We worship our own religion, our own community, rather than the God who we seek to serve ultimately. And to make that distinction, that policies, institutions always need to be criticized and smashed ultimately in light of the better, in light of God's absolute demand for justice, I think is what unites us. At least that's what I'm hearing here tonight.
Yes, and you know, a criticism from the right, if you will, for the sake of this discussion, is that the left is anti-religion and doesn't care about God. And the criticism from the left is that the right exploits God and uses God to take away people's rights. I think we have to listen to both sides and deconstruct these points and have more conversations about these types of issues.
Yes.
That to me will make us more relevant. And I think that answers part of the question that you were asking. How do we, you know, become more involved in these issues? We first have to become more relevant. And that means addressing the real issues that are facing these communities that we're, you know, let's face it, we are disconnected from because we live in nice, comfortable, luxurious homes, whether in Colorado or in California. And somehow we have to penetrate that, like Father Gregory Boyle does so well. And you know, what an angel he is in terms of actually being on the, you know, tete-a-tete with the people who he's serving, and we have to do the same.
Yeah, and at the same time, he says he's not making a sacrifice because that's where God is.
Exactly.
That's where God is, and he wants to be where God is, namely with those who are on the margins. That's where God is to be found.
Exactly. Yeah. Pope Francis often tells us that we, as priests, and I would expand that to my colleagues here as well, must, if we're to be the shepherds, we must smell like the sheep. In other words, we have to be in the trenches with the sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kenan, you want to again chime in on what is the way forward as you see it from your vantage point, and or commenting, bouncing off of what we have heard?
Yeah. It's funny because I wrote a reflection on this question, like where do we go from here, for our school newsletter, looking at how religion can guide us through this era of division that we're living in. I think first and foremost, we definitely, as everyone is saying, we need to center that human dignity of all of us, of all humanity. Remember our common humanity. I would add one thing to that I think we shouldn't assume that if we disagree with someone and they have a different opinion as it comes to politics, that they're approaching it from a bad intention. I think most people are coming at it well-intentioned. The policy may be wrong, it may be harmful, but I don't think they're coming at it from a bad intention necessarily. So I think that should be one aspect of the common humanity. And then I think we also need to just rethink how we're responding to diversity. The Quran tells us that, O mankind, we made you from a single man and a single woman, and we made you into nations and tribes that you can get to know one another. So then are we going to respond to diversity that's out there because we can see it all around us? Are we going to respond to it and see it as a curse, or are we going to see it as a blessing? I think if we view it as a blessing that we can learn from, and we can learn from one another, and really kind of embrace it completely, then we can move forward. And then the other thing I think that's important in addition to the golden rule that we've been talking about, loving our neighbor as ourselves, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think we need to put the civil back in civil discourse. The
Yes.
Quran again comes in here because Saddam mentions this verse all the time. Invite all to the way of your Lord with wisdom and kind advice. So we need to stop dehumanizing one another. I think we need to stop talking at each other. We should talk to each other, come to the table to better understand one another, and kind of move forward from there. And I think also I included this in the reflection that I had written, the words of Jesus, Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. We need peacemakers in our world today. And I would argue that, being grounded in our faith traditions, we definitely have a moral framework and a moral worldview for the world and an ethical worldview that is just so needed for our world today, to tackle our issues and our challenges today. So I think through having these conversations and making it public for everyone to hear and to hopefully benefit from, we are making it more relevant. Religion is not some ancient institution that has no place in our world today. Let us make it relevant today. So I hope that that's what we're striving towards. And I think this is what we're doing right now. The work that all of us have done. I love how we've, with the Academy, we've done screenings of films that talk about history that we don't usually know about, like The Sultan and the Saint, talking about St. Francis of Assisi, and his encounter with the Sultan of Egypt during the Crusades. MPAC's work. I mean, even me as a Muslim, I learned so much just from MPAC, because those were things that MPAC talks about, which you don't typically hear in the mosque necessarily. I think their work on comparing the Medina Constitution with the US Constitution is so important for our world today in embracing that diversity. So I think, doing things like this, having more events like these, more forums for the community to learn from, hopefully that will be the way forward. And let's just remember that, we're all part of the human family. So let's stop dehumanizing each other.
Amen.
Amen. I love all of this because we started by talking about, we don't talk about religion or politics anymore. When I grew up, don't talk about religion or politics. It's rude. And what I have come to realize by working with 18-year-olds at the university level is that they don't talk about religion or politics, and they don't know how to. It's a very different thing. You can't just say talk about it, and so they have to be taught how to listen, how to respect, and so they need practice.
Yeah.
And so I love that we're doing this because they don't have any practice, and then of course they're going to mess up. So thank you again for all of this, because I think it really helps me have practice.
Yes.
If I can also invoke a Robert Frost in his poem "A Road Less Traveled." That same concept is found in the Quran in Surah number 90, the Surah of the land, where it says, "Have we not given him 2 eyes and a tongue and a pair of lips, and shown him the 2 highways of good and evil? But he would not try to ascend the steep uphill road. And what could make thee conceive what it is, that steep uphill road? It is the freeing of one's neck from the burden of sin and bondage, or the feeding upon a day of one's own hunger, or of an orphan and near of kin, or of a needy stranger lying in the dust, and being withal of those who have attained to faith, and who enjoin upon one another patience in adversity, and enjoin upon one another compassion." And I think, again, that road of struggling would lead us to the goal of patience in adversity and compassion.
Amen.
Amen.
And I would just like to add that we also need to have serious conversations within our respective communities. On this call, there was a lot of agreement tonight, but we know that within our respective traditions and communities, people have very different opinions. And what we practiced here tonight, that we also need to go back and practice within our own community, namely to listen not assume somebody is coming from a malicious place, but maybe ask, how did you come to that position, to that conviction? What led you to this place? And really listen deeply to one another. I would like to thank each of you from the bottom of my heart for sharing very personal stories and also the deep convictions that help us to understand a little more why you do the work that you do. And I wish that God will bless us all as we go into the new year and do our small part to work for the dignity of all human beings. So thank you very much.
God bless you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Nice to see you guys. Thank you so much.
Peace.
Okay.
Thank you, Kenan,
Yeah,
Thank you,
bye-bye.
thank you all for coming.
Brother Lexi, and Rabbi
Thank
Jack.
you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.